In the summer of 1935, a strange order circulated through the offices of the SS Security Service in Berlin. It did not concern weapons. It did not concern spies. Instead, the order demanded something unusual: collect every document about witch trials in Europe. Old court records from the 16th and 17th centuries were to be photographed. Church archives were to be searched. Regional libraries were to send copies of medieval trial transcripts. The project had a bureaucratic name: hexen sonderauftrag, the Special Witch Assignment. At the center of the initiative stood one man, Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS. To outsiders, the project seemed bizarre. Germany in the 1930s was building tanks, rockets, and a modern war machine. Yet inside the SS headquarters, researchers were suddenly studying executions of witches that had happened 400 years earlier. But for Himmler, this was not an academic curiosity. He believed that the witch trials had been one of the greatest crimes in European history. According to a theory he repeated in speeches to SS officers, the women burned as witches were not criminals, nor servants of the devil. They were something else entirely. In Himmler's imagination, many of them had been the last guardians of ancient Germanic traditions, healers, midwives, and keepers of pagan knowledge that had survived from the pre-Christian world. And the Church, he believed, had destroyed them. If this theory could be proven, it would serve a powerful political purpose. It would show that Christianity had murdered thousands of German women and crushed the true spiritual heritage of the German people. Himmler wanted evidence. So the SS began building one of the strangest archives of the Third Reich. Researchers traveled across Germany, Austria, Poland, Switzerland, and even parts of France, copying centuries-old documents. Local historians were quietly recruited to help the project. Librarians received letters stamped with the SS insignia, requesting access to fragile manuscripts that few people had opened for generations. Every trial was catalogued on a card: name of the accused, year of execution, method of death, location of the court. Within a few years, the SS had assembled a massive database known as the hexenkartei, the witch card index. More than 30,000 cases were recorded. To Himmler, the archive was proof that history had been written by the wrong side. But historians who would later examine the files would reach a very different conclusion. Because the Witch Project revealed something far more disturbing than medieval superstition. It showed how the Nazi regime was willing to rewrite the past itself, turning centuries-old tragedies into ideological weapons. And it all began with a man who believed that the flames of the witch trials were not the end of an ancient world, but evidence of a conspiracy that had lasted for hundreds of years. Long before the SS began collecting witch trial records, Heinrich Himmler had already developed a strange fascination with the distant past. Unlike many Nazi leaders, Himmler did not see history simply as propaganda. He saw it as something almost mystical, a hidden story waiting to be rediscovered. Born in 1900 in Munich, Himmler grew up in a conservative Catholic family. His father was a strict schoolteacher who expected discipline and obedience. As a young man, Himmler appeared shy, awkward, and physically unimpressive, the opposite of the heroic warrior image he would later try to promote within the SS. But what he lacked in charisma, he replaced with obsession. During the 1920s, while Germany struggled through economic collapse and political violence, Himmler began reading extensively about Germanic mythology, ancient tribes, and folklore. Books about the Norse gods, runic symbols, and pagan rituals fascinated him far more than modern politics. Many of these works were not serious scholarship. They came from fringe writers who blended archaeology, mythology, and fantasy into theories about a lost Aryan civilization that had once dominated Europe. Himmler absorbed these ideas eagerly. He became convinced that before Christianity arrived, Europe had been home to a powerful and noble Germanic culture, a world of warrior clans, sacred forests, and sun worship. In this imagined past, the German people possessed a deep, spiritual connection to nature and the cosmos. Christianity, Himmler believed, had destroyed that world. He frequently described the spread of Christianity in Europe not as a religious transformation, but as a cultural conquest. In speeches to SS officers, he argued that the Church had replaced strong pagan traditions with what he called a religion of weakness. He claimed that Christianity taught submission and humility, values he believed were incompatible with the ruthless strength the Nazis wanted to cultivate. For Himmler, the solution was not simply political power, it was spiritual reconstruction. He envisioned the SS as something more than a military organization. In his mind, it was to become a new knightly order, a brotherhood that would revive ancient Germanic traditions and reshape the spiritual identity of Germany. To reinforce this idea, Himmler began filling SS culture with symbols from mythology. Runes were adopted as official insignia. Ceremonies were held during the winter solstice and summer solstice. Marriage rituals for SS officers were redesigned to resemble what Himmler believed were ancient pagan customs. One of the most famous examples was Wewelsburg Castle, a medieval fortress in western Germany that Himmler transformed into a symbolic center of the SS. Inside the castle, rooms were redesigned with dark stone floors, runic patterns, and circular halls meant to resemble mythical gathering places of ancient Germanic leaders. Himmler imagined that one day the highest SS officers would meet there like knights of a secret order, discussing the future of a new empire. But to build this mythology, Himmler believed he needed proof that the old Germanic world had truly existed, and that it had been destroyed by its enemies. This is where the witch trials entered the story. While reading historical works about the mass persecutions of witches between the 15th and 17th centuries, Himmler became fascinated by one particular detail. Most of the victims were women, and many of them had been accused of things that sounded suspiciously similar to old folk traditions: healing with herbs, performing seasonal rituals, or maintaining local superstitions. To Himmler, this was not coincidence. It looked like evidence. In his mind, the witch hunts were not random outbreaks of hysteria. They were the final stage of a centuries-long war, a campaign by the Christian Church to eliminate the last remnants of pagan Germanic culture. If he could prove that theory, Himmler believed it would change how Germans understood their own past. So, in the mid-1930s, he decided to investigate, not as a historian, but as the leader of the SS. In 1935, Heinrich Himmler decided that his theory about witches needed proof. Not speculation, not folklore. He wanted documents. So he ordered the creation of one of the most unusual research programs in Nazi Germany, the hexen sonderauftrag, or Special Witch Assignment. The project was placed under the authority of the SS Security Service, SD, and supervised by an SS officer named Dr. Rudolf Levin. Levin was not a famous scholar, but he was exactly what Himmler needed: a bureaucratic organizer capable of managing large volumes of historical data. The mission was clear: collect every possible record of witch trials across Europe. Researchers began searching archives in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Poland, and France. Letters bearing SS insignia were sent to universities and regional libraries, requesting access to fragile manuscripts, church court documents, and municipal trial records. In many places, local archivists were confused. Why would the SS, the most feared security organization of the Third Reich, suddenly be interested in centuries-old accusations of witchcraft? But the requests kept coming. Soon, teams of researchers were copying and photographing documents that had not been examined for generations. Some records were written in Latin, others in archaic German dialects that required careful translation. Every piece of information was extracted and recorded. The SS created a massive index system known as the hexenkartei, the witch card index. Each case was documented on a single card. The cards contained detailed information: name of the accused, date of arrest, location of the trial, social status of the victim, the accusations made in court, the method of execution. Many cards also recorded who conducted the trial, whether it was a local secular court or a church tribunal. The goal was to identify patterns. Were certain regions responsible for more executions? Were women targeted more frequently than men? Did church courts play the primary role in sentencing? Within a few years, the SS archive grew enormous. By 1944, the project had cataloged over 30,000 witch trial cases from across Europe. Entire filing cabinets in SS offices were filled with index cards describing executions that had taken place 3 or 4 centuries earlier. But the most remarkable part of the project was not the size of the archive. It was the conclusion Himmler hoped to reach. He wanted the research to demonstrate that the witch hunts were not simply episodes of mass hysteria. Instead, he believed they were a systematic campaign organized by the Christian Church to destroy the spiritual traditions of ancient Germanic society. In speeches to SS officers, Himmler described the witch trials as one of the greatest crimes committed against the German people. He claimed that thousands of women burned as witches were actually healers, midwives, and guardians of ancient knowledge. If the SS could prove that theory, it would serve an important political purpose. It would allow the Nazi regime to portray Christianity, particularly the Catholic Church, as an enemy that had persecuted the German people for centuries. And in the ideological world of the SS, that narrative mattered, because the Nazis were not only trying to reshape the future, they were also trying to rewrite the past. To understand why Himmler became obsessed with witches, you have to understand something deeper about the Nazi regime. The Nazis were not only trying to conquer territory, they were also trying to reshape the spiritual identity of Germany. And for Heinrich Himmler, Christianity was a problem. Germany in the 1930s was still a deeply religious society. Millions of people identified as Catholic or Protestant, and churches remained powerful institutions with influence over education, family life, and moral authority. But many leaders inside the Nazi movement viewed Christianity with suspicion. Adolf Hitler himself publicly avoided attacking religion too openly, knowing that doing so could alienate large parts of the population. In speeches, he often claimed that the Nazi movement respected Christianity. Behind the scenes, however, the reality was more complicated. Within the SS leadership, especially under Himmler, Christianity was increasingly seen as a foreign ideology that had weakened the German spirit. Himmler believed Christianity promoted values that contradicted what the Nazis wanted to build. According to his worldview, Christianity encouraged humility, forgiveness, compassion, equality of all people before God. But the Nazi ideology promoted something very different: strength, domination, racial hierarchy, loyalty to the state above all else. To Himmler, Christianity represented a moral system that prevented the rise of the ruthless warrior culture he admired in ancient Germanic tribes. He often described Christianity as a religion of weakness. Even more troubling for him was the religion's origin. Christianity had emerged from the Middle East and spread through the Roman Empire. For the racial ideologues of the SS, this made it appear foreign to the so-called Aryan world. Some SS thinkers went even further, claiming that Christianity had been influenced by Jewish traditions, making it fundamentally incompatible with Nazi racial doctrine. Because of this, Himmler began imagining a future in which Germany would gradually abandon Christianity altogether. But destroying a religion that had existed for over 1,000 years was not simple. It required something powerful, a new narrative about history. And that is where the witch hunts became politically useful. If Himmler could prove that the Christian Church had burned thousands of innocent German women, he could portray Christianity not as a moral authority, but as a historical oppressor. The SS began presenting witch trials as evidence of a long war against Germanic culture. In Himmler's interpretation, the victims were not criminals or heretics. They were keepers of ancient traditions, women who knew herbal medicine, women who practiced folk rituals tied to seasonal cycles, women who preserved fragments of pre-Christian beliefs that had survived in rural communities. In Nazi propaganda, these women were sometimes described as the last defenders of the old Germanic world, and the Church, according to Himmler, had destroyed them. This idea conveniently served the ideological goals of the SS. By blaming the Church for the witch trials, the Nazis could undermine the moral authority of Christianity and replace it with a mythological past centered around Germanic pagan traditions. At the same time, Himmler was already trying to build alternative rituals inside the SS. Christian holidays were quietly replaced with celebrations tied to nature and seasonal cycles. The winter solstice became an important symbolic event within SS culture. Instead of traditional Christmas imagery, some SS ceremonies emphasized ancient sun symbolism and pagan mythology. Marriage ceremonies for SS officers were redesigned to remove Christian elements. Couples sometimes participated in rituals involving torches, runic symbols, and references to ancestral bloodlines. Even funerals were altered. Rather than traditional church burials, some SS funerals emphasized loyalty to the Reich and the idea of eternal connection to the German people. These changes were subtle at first. The Nazi leadership knew that openly attacking Christianity too aggressively could provoke public backlash. But inside the SS, a slow transformation was already underway, and the Witch Research Project played a symbolic role in that transformation. The Hexen Archive gave Himmler what he wanted, a historical story that could be used to argue that Christianity had not only replaced pagan traditions, but violently destroyed them. In this narrative, the flames of the witch trials were not the result of fear or superstition. They were the final act in a centuries-long cultural purge. Modern historians reject this interpretation almost entirely. The causes of witch trials were far more complex, involving social tensions, legal systems, local politics, and widespread belief in the supernatural. But the truth mattered less to the SS than the myth, because myths could be used to shape the future. And for Heinrich Himmler, the story of the witches was not about medieval history. It was about creating a new Germany, built on a completely different past. Despite the enormous effort behind the SS Witch Project, the research was never truly about discovering the truth. It was about proving a theory that Himmler had already decided was correct. By the late 1930s, the Hexen Archive had grown into one of the largest collections of witch trial documentation ever assembled. Thousands of trial transcripts had been copied, cataloged, and analyzed. But the results did not support Himmler's grand narrative. The documents showed something very different. Witch trials were not a single organized campaign by the Church to destroy pagan priestesses. In many regions, trials were conducted by local secular courts, not church authorities. Some persecutions were driven by political rivalries, others by personal accusations between neighbors. Many of the accused were not healers or guardians of ancient traditions. They were ordinary people, farmers, widows, craftsmen, or villagers caught in waves of fear and suspicion. In some cases, entire communities became trapped in cycles of accusations. Once a single person confessed under torture, they often named others, leading to a chain reaction of arrests. The reality was messy, complicated, and tragic. But it was not the conspiracy Himmler hoped to uncover. This created an awkward problem. The SS had invested years of work and enormous resources into the hexen sonderauftrag. Archivists, historians, and clerks had spent countless hours building the index. Yet the evidence refused to cooperate. Instead of abandoning the theory, the SS researchers quietly adjusted their interpretation of the data. Some reports emphasize cases where women were healers or midwives, suggesting they might have preserved fragments of pre-Christian traditions. Other reports highlighted trials where church officials played a role, reinforcing the narrative of religious persecution. Contradictory evidence was often ignored. In the ideological environment of the Third Reich, research was expected to confirm the worldview of the regime, not challenge it. Even so, the project never achieved the dramatic historical proof Himmler had hoped for. By the early 1940s, the war began to consume more and more of Germany's resources. Military priorities replaced academic projects, and the witch research program gradually lost attention. The vast card index remained in SS archives, but the dream of rewriting European history around the witch trials slowly faded. When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, Allied forces captured large portions of SS documentation. Among the files were the strange records of the Hexen project, thousands of cards describing executions that had taken place centuries earlier. To modern historians, the archive is fascinating for a different reason than Himmler imagined. It does not prove the existence of pagan priestesses secretly hunted by the church. Instead, it reveals something about the Nazis themselves. The Witch Project shows how the regime attempted to manipulate history, searching for narratives that could justify its ideology. Even events from the distant past were reshaped to support the political goals of the present. For Heinrich Himmler, the witch trials had seemed like a perfect symbol, a story of ancient German traditions destroyed by foreign influence. But in the end, the archive he created tells a different story, not about witches, but about how one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany tried to turn history into a weapon. By the final years of World War II, the SS Witch Project had quietly faded into the background. Germany was collapsing. Cities were being bombed. Armies were retreating on every front. And the Third Reich was fighting for survival. In that environment, the idea of cataloging medieval witch trials suddenly seemed insignificant. But the files still existed. Inside SS offices and archives were thousands of carefully organized cards, the hexenkartei, the witch card index, documenting accusations and executions that had taken place centuries earlier. Each card represented a person, a name, a place, a date of death. Most of those women had lived and died in small villages long forgotten by history. Yet, their stories had been collected by one of the most powerful organizations of the 20th century. When Allied forces captured Germany in 1945, they seized enormous amounts of Nazi documentation. Military intelligence officers and historians began examining SS archives to understand how the regime had functioned. Among the files were the strange records of Himmler's witch project. To the Allied investigators, the archive must have seemed surreal. In the middle of a regime responsible for industrialized mass murder and global war, here was evidence that the SS had also spent years studying executions from the 16th and 17th centuries. But the discovery revealed something important. The Hexen archive was not simply an eccentric historical project. It showed how deeply the Nazi leadership believed in rewriting the past. For Heinrich Himmler, history was not a fixed record of events. It was something that could be reshaped to serve ideology. If the past did not support his vision of a mythical Germanic civilization, then the past itself had to be reinterpreted. The witch trials became a convenient symbol. By portraying them as the destruction of ancient Germanic priestesses, Himmler tried to construct a narrative in which Christianity had oppressed the German people for centuries. It was a story designed to weaken the authority of the Church and replace it with a new mythology built around race, blood, and ancestral heritage. Modern historians studying the same documents today see something very different. The witch trials were not the result of a hidden war against pagan priestesses. They were complex tragedies driven by fear, superstition, political conflicts, and social tensions in early modern Europe. But the Hexen files remain valuable. Ironically, the archive created to support a Nazi myth has become a useful historical resource. Scholars have used the documents to better understand how witch trials spread across Europe and how thousands of people were accused, tortured, and executed during that period. Yet the archive also tells another story, one about the Nazi regime itself. It reveals how one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany became obsessed with a vision of the past that never truly existed. Heinrich Himmler believed he could uncover evidence of a lost world, a pagan civilization destroyed by Christianity. Instead, what he created was something else entirely. A vast archive that now serves as a reminder of how dangerous it can be when ideology tries to control history. Because when governments begin searching the past not for truth, but for confirmation of their beliefs, history stops being a record of what happened and becomes a tool of power.